them, and also you should have the agenda and also the work plans that I have at least completed thus far. So I've done a lot of talking to you. It's time for you folks to talk to us, because I'm sure we're missing pieces. Remember, this is not my area of specialty. Jen is the brains of the operation when it comes to that. My job is just to facilitate meetings and help to make the things work like they're supposed to, or at least try to. So without any further ado, we'll go to item number 1A, other ideas from members of the working group. Again, I provided you with some work plans to at least think about, and what am I missing? What else should we be thinking? And we'll talk a little bit about some of these and how we might change those to make them appropriate as you deem fit. So anybody can jump in at any time. Somebody, anybody. I know I'm not that good, that I covered everything right. No way.
Hi, Sean. I'm Jackie Cowell from Early Learning, New Hampshire. I wasn't at the previous meeting, so it does seem a little inappropriate for me to comment on it, but
perfect. Perfect.
But I thought it was really interesting, and I loved how it was very plotted out, and an end game and a this and a that. I thought that was fascinating.
But what am I missing though? And we've got work plans for certain types of things. What else are we not covering that you think we should be covering? Because again, you folks work in this field, I don't. So I need to make sure that our broad, the tent that we have is pretty large. Obviously, the things that are covered underneath that we're responsible for solving the problems of. So what am I missing? Julie, please.
Sean, I think you've developed a very broad and excellent agenda. I think for me, with my role with the Community Loan Fund, given the title of our committee, there is perhaps a deeper thread of facilities related work in addition to what's already been mapped out for the work plans.
Okay, could you elaborate?
That's just something I would add for consideration.
Could you kind of scope that out a little bit more? What you mean by that?
I think, if we're thinking about a deeper dive around facility needs, how adequate are facilities? I know you've got mapped out some good ways to look at public-private partnerships around facilities. And just another thread might be looking at adequacy of facilities, cost of facilities, what's needed to improve facilities, acquire facilities when they're leased, kind of, related to our role as a community development lender supporting those activities, and the relation of facilities to quality programming. And I know we have a counterpart in Vermont as well, the Vermont Community Loan Fund, that does excellent work as well.
Okay. Someone else was going to jump in? Jackie?
Well, a quick question, then Brenda should. My question was, I'm not aware of what the other committees are, so it's hard to know where the gap is.
Okay. So first thing, we should get you a copy of the agenda for the first meeting, because we talked about what those do. So we have advocacy, and their job is not just, it's literally advocacy with the legislatures and also the local level, but also just the issue in general, making sure that word gets out and people fully understand what what we're dealing with in the child care sector. And then we have recruitment and retention. That's a whole separate group. And there's dovetails between these different committees. Like we have some things in these work plans that are going to involve advocacy, and there's also going to be some with the retention and recruitment group. So we're just going to make sure that we stay within our lane, and when we go into theirs, we collaborate with them to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts.
Thank you. That's clear.
I'm gonna set the drawer up, Julie, a work plan for that. I'm going to send it to you as a draft. I'll just need you to make some changes to it that you deem appropriate. I'll try to incorporate the things that you just said with that one. So I'll work on that. What else do we have?
And you let me know, again, there's a set scope of work for us as a group, whether that falls in or outside, our scope of work.
It does. It's definitely us. There's nobody else. So that's definitely us. So like I say, I'll draw that up for you, and I'll shoot it over to you as a draft, and then we can bounce it back and get it out to the rest of the group.
Sure.
as I look through the documents that we get each time, which are so thorough and like really well presented, I appreciate them. Thank you. What I realized would be helpful from my perspective, and maybe for the, which I actually think it would be helpful for the group, is to understand what's already happening. And so what I'd love to do is sort of have like, here's what we're working on and here's what's already happening and how can this plug into what already exists. Like, for example, on the property tax exemption for childcare facilities, this time I was like, hey, you know, my colleagues on the policy team at LGK have been advocating for this to the governor and the legislature for the last several years. And right now, the governor has proposed a property tax exemption for the coming year for childcare facilities that are pre-K partners, and a broader exemption, property tax exemption for the following year for all regulated programs. So I think it's really key, so that, you know, like somebody said, duplication, it's really key to understand what's already happening so that we're not duplicating that with our time and our efforts and our resources. Because I'm happy to tell you what, so I serve on the board of the Vermont, for the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. So I could tell you about like what we're holding, and I could tell you what LGK is holding, and I could tell you what the Opportunities Exchange work under Shared Services Vermont is holding on this side of the river. And like, so there are key pieces of things that you're talking about that we're talking about together. Another one was like, oh my gosh, I know about like a dozen public-private partnerships that are either already established or forming right now in Vermont. And I want to be able to give that to you without like talking at these meetings, right? So is there a way that we could have a document where we could just sort of plug those things in? Like, here's how this is already being addressed, and here's sort of where we are in moving the needle.
So the way to do that is Andra is going to talk about that. In fact, you want to do that at the beginning. We could probably do that now, Andra, just jump in and do that. What platforms people are operating on, because we need a sandbox where everybody can see all the documents. And that's where you can put that material in there. Because remember, I'm not in this field, and every time I go to one of these meetings, I learn more about what's going on by other folks and some of the issues they're already dealing with. And I have a real weakness on the Vermont side because I'm in New Hampshire. I'm used to the legislative process here. I know nothing about the legislative process in Vermont. So that's really helpful, because New Hampshire, I know, is doing nothing on its property tax exemption. And we're going to have to create it from scratch here and build that bill and send it into the legislature and build, obviously, allies to get it passed.
Well, and what I think is great is there are some things that are happening that are so wildly successful already that we could replicate them. And then just like, it's about replication and scalability, maybe, instead of, you know, you guys or anybody having to reinvent the wheel.
No, that's definitely going to be helpful. That's why we brought you folks together, is to help share the information that's going on out there. And we break into these subgroups to start working on these. That's when we get into the weeds of that and finding out what others are already doing, instead of replicating it and reinventing the wheel. So, Andra, do you want to talk about the your question about what platforms people use, how you want to deal with that?
Yeah, I'll let everybody know. I'm going to put together a really short, easy survey among all the workgroup participants so that we're all using the same kinds of platforms, and it may be a couple. But I'm thinking that the functionalities that we need are a place to store documents and a place to communicate. Those are the main things, in a centralized place, and they can be accessible to all of the different participants in the work groups. So I'm just going to send out a brief survey about what people are already using, what you're already familiar with and comfortable with. We're going to choose something that's never going to work for everybody, and we'll just go forward the best we can. So
we have a steering committee that we meet outside of this, and we're wrestling with those sorts of issues. There are very robust programs like Microsoft Teams, like I use, but it's not easy to learn how to use that. So we need to have something that's as simple as possible, that's intuitive as possible, to be able to operate on without a steep learning curve. So we're wrestling with that issue. We're working through that particular problem. So before I go into these other items, though, what other ideas are we missing that I need to be adding to our list? Celicia?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback a little bit more onto what Brenda said about what already exists. And it's so exciting to me to think that what exists in Vermont, what exists in New Hampshire, can all be brought to bear, perhaps in the Upper Valley. I think there's a really exciting opportunity here. But I sort of wear two hats in joining your meeting here. And I did go to your first symposium session and got a sort of a taste of what you'd be working on. But one of the hats I wear is that I was the director of the State Early Learning Alliance, SEALA, for about 10 years. And prior to being in that position, I was an active user of many of the services and resources that we established about 15 years ago. And most recently, I've actually joined the team at CCO Global Partners. And the role that I'm in there is helping the national, well, the CELA website, which Vermont and New Hampshire both have, and 33 states have, help more programs utilize these resources and benefit from them. And what really struck me in looking at your agenda is that many of the things that are on there have already actually been established and built. And thanks to a partnership with Howard Brodsky and him bringing his scale and his infrastructure and clout to bear for childcare programs, and then through some local partnerships in New Hampshire. So I think, when you think it's ready, I'd love to share more detail about what exists already that you can tap into, so that, and then where are the gaps? Because I think programs should have everything that's already been established and more.
Yeah, Howard's done a great job with CCI. I've reached out a couple of times to CCI, but I didn't get any responses back. But we talked about that in our last meeting. That's an excellent place for us to, you folks have already done that work, you know how to set these up. And of course, in the public sector, we already have a number of these that have been very successful, anywhere from health insurance to liability and workers' comp insurance. That's a little bit more tricky, as you know, because it requires a certain scale to make it work, but not impossible to do. And I have some ideas along that. But these work groups are going to be important. We start talking about these work plans and start to build them out further and do the exploratory work. We will take what others have already done and just build from that and Upper Valley-ize it. I call it here Lebanize things as the city of Lebanon. So Jackie?
Yeah, Sean. So we actually did talk to Howard Brodsky. Celissa and I did talk to Howard Brodsky. So he's aware of Sean Mulholland's request. So that I hope you don't ever get crickets anymore about it, because, that's a big company. So let's hope. So he's really interested.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've talked to Howard, like 12 years ago. So it's quite the man. Other thoughts about other topical areas that we don't already have listed that we want to start to travel down and start to think about, folks? What else am I missing before we do that? Well, if there are others, let me know. Obviously, we're at the beginning of this process, not the end of it. So item number B, we have subcommittee property tax exemption for childcare facilities. We already talked about that a little bit. In New Hampshire, there's already a number of entities that already have property tax exemptions for charitable organizations. And then there's a number of others that are separately listed. So that would be important for us to think about how we're going to do that. I won't get into the details of some of that, because it may not fit under our for-profit childcare facilities are not going to fall under the charities exemption. This would require a separate category under RSA 72 to do this, and will require the right language to be drafted to get that done. So I need a group of people that will work with that, and I will use one of our attorneys from the city to help draft the appropriate language. We're going to work with advocacy, because really this falls into their camp as we start to build it out. It's for them to work it further. But I will use my channels through NHMA and other lobbying groups to advocate for that, assuming that's what we want to do at the end of the day. So I'll need someone who would want to take charge of that and work with that and make that happen. We don't have to answer that right now. We can wait till we get to the bottom. We go through the rest of these. But it might just be one or two people working with me, because I'm probably going to be helping out on each one of these to make them happen. So any thoughts about B before I talk a little bit more about the others?
Sorry, feel free to call on me if I'm just the only one.
Oh, I'm glad you're talking.
Feel free to wait and call others first. But I just wanted to share with you that even though she's in Exeter and Portsmouth, that a woman named Caitlin Dennis from Great Bay Kids Company, they're a nonprofit, but Exeter was charging them tens of thousands of dollars in property tax because they weren't educational, they weren't this or that. And we have a template. Celissa worked with her closely, a template where she fought them about saying, yes, childcare, even during nap time, is educational. And it was really powerful, and it worked. And they paid her back $80,000. And so we have someone who's fought that in a really smart way. So I'm sure she'd be glad to share about that.
Is that a nonprofit entity that got that?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it doesn't really fit into the present statute for property tax exemption for one of those facilities. So did
Yeah,
she get a
they
pilot
were
agreement?
charging her.
Was it a pilot agreement or total tax exemption? Do you
You're
know?
out of my, you're over my head.
Okay, yeah.
So
Typically-
they were charging her. So, right, Celissa, Exeter was charging her tens of thousands of dollars a year. She was trying to fight it. She finally kept going over Exeter's head and everything else. And finally, a state board said, yes, they are an educational exemption, and because childcare is also educational. So I don't know if that translates to what you're asking, but.
I don't interpret the statute that way. So if
Right.
somebody asked for that here, I would deny it because I follow the law as it reads. And I would not interpret that. That's why I think we need a statutory change. At the end of the day, this is not going to be devastating to municipalities for one or two facilities or even a dozen facilities. It's just, you know, I got $3 billion of assessed value in the city. And, you know, it's just not going to move the needle that much. On the tax side, it's certainly going to move the needle on the institution side for the childcare centers. So that's why I think it's definitely worth looking at. And my own colleagues, a lot of them, well, I shouldn't say a lot of them, some of them may be opposed to that. So I'll have to bring that group around and say, look, you know, the value compared to what we lose in revenue is so significant. So I think it's worth going. And I'd be one of those people that if the advocacy committee saw it appropriate, if they asked me to, I would advocate at our legislature on behalf of that for both nonprofit and for-profit childcare facilities. So
I can tell you that part of the challenge in Vermont is not that people think that that early childhood shouldn't be exempted, but it's that then there are others like mental health who are like, hey, well, what about us? And so it's sort of more, it just becomes complicated. It becomes very complicated because more people say, we also would like to be considered for that. So that's part of the conversation. And I should say that, so the governor says, and I'm going to quote here, a full exemption from education property taxes for pre-K providers in fiscal year 23 and a partial refund for licensed childcare providers in fiscal year 24. Those are his exact words in the current proposal in Vermont. But I think it's worth noting that it may not move forward this year because right now the legislature and the governor are not in agreement on how to approach tax relief.
yeah, well, we know how that goes, right?
So
Sarah?
Brenda, is there language beyond what the governor said that you could share with Sean that would be useful, do you think, in terms of is it a bill that has gone before the Vermont legislature?
So I can share, yes, I can share that, but I think it's going to be easier for me, instead of trying to drop a link in the chat, it's going to be easier for me to email it afterwards. So
That's what I mean.
just email that? I'm here basically, well, I'm here for a lot of reasons because I want this to be wildly successful with like long-term sustainable solutions, right? But I just want to be like maybe a conduit for what I do know is happening in Vermont. And I don't want to burden the meetings with, you know, me telling you what's happening in Vermont. So I was thinking that I might wait for whatever document we have to drop it in there, but I'm also happy to separately email whomever is designated, like where will it land best, I guess, and be most useful.
All documents go to Andra because she is the one who's collecting all the information. And again, once we get a sandbox, we can all play in and we'll all have it there and you can just drop things there. But
okay, so I'll email things to Andra. And
please.
Andra and I already know each other, so that's awesome. Thanks.
And then before you go on, Sean, I just wanted to ask him if New Futures is doing anything on this issue with the property tax already that Sean should be aware of in trying to draft anything.
Thank you for reaching out to us. As far as I'm aware, we aren't. We do more so kind of statewide base, and I feel like property tax is a bit of a slippery slope in New Hampshire. So I don't believe at this time that's something we're working on, but thank you for reaching out for input.
Sure.
Yeah, it will not be easy like anything else trying to get in front of the legislature. I mean, you folks are probably savvy enough to know that everything is a fight, it's a challenge, and there will be people in opposition, and there may be some allies you didn't expect to be on board. And that's if you're familiar with the game in Concord, I'm sure it's the same in Montpelier. That's part of the process of, obtaining allies and minimizing the enemy wherever you need to do that. So it's a process, and I won't bore you with all the details of that. All right, so if there's nothing further on B, let's go to number C, and that would be letter C. Subcommittee creation of a service support cooperative for childcare facilities. And I believe Celicia and Jackie, this is probably more in your realm of what you've been talking about, and as well as probably, well, maybe less so item number D. So thoughts on what I've already presented to you on C?
I think we
Well,
just have to
I
take.
can just add a little bit more. I already mentioned, we have nationally negotiated discounts through our partnership with Howard Brodsky. And what I didn't actually realize after 10 plus years as the Seal Estate Director is that obviously some of the vendors that are on our web platform are specific to childcare. They're classroom supplies and educational materials for teachers to use in the classroom with children. But many of the business discounts, or all of the business discounts actually, for things like trash removal, payroll service, et cetera, are negotiated nationally for all of their divisions. So when we're tapping into discounted waste removal, which oftentimes you don't even actually change your vendor, you just get factored into the pooled purchasing through CCA Global, that it's more than 100,000 businesses in that purchasing pool because it's all of their divisions. So I think that's pretty phenomenal. And then locally, we have partnerships with commercial insurance for discounted workers' compensation, liability, property, director and officers, et cetera. They're heating, fuel, electricity, et cetera. And many of these services are available statewide, if not all of them, most all of them. So I think, there probably are other things that would be specific to the Upper Valley, but it would be great to see you be able to tap into all these things that are already established that can really put more money back in the budget for the programs. And some of it actually puts money in the teachers' pockets as well. But I do want to mention, because this was something that we wrestled with early on when CELA was being developed by a group of directors. And that is, changing your vendor can sometimes be kind of hard, especially if you have had a long-term relationship. But what really was so black and white to me was that year after year, struggling to come up with enough revenue without charging families a lot more to give teachers raises, to give people raises, and then thinking, I can't justify paying more than I have to for trash removal or for copier leasing or for some of these other things, because teachers really need it in their pockets, and the families that we're serving really need it in their pockets. So I think it can be hard, but there's a lot of support, and we can be there together as a team to help programs take advantage of these things that are already developed.
So one of the things I was more thinking of in the line with this is certainly those purchasing in a pool fashion, but there's other issues like workers' comp, liability insurance, and it sounds like you go on the market, you probably get the best price that's available, but you're not necessarily part of a pool. And I believe CCA Global Partners has its own insurance pools, do you not? I think that's how you operate, if I remember right. It's been a while since I had the lesson from Howard on that, but I believe you folks had your own pools. I know the Lawson Group in New Hampshire, they actually have insurance pools, and one of them is for the forest industry folks. They create their own property liability, workers' comp pool. We have our own for public employees. We have our own pool for workers' comp. There's a couple of them actually, and our own health insurance pool as well. Now that takes an economy of scale, and also there are statutory provisions when it comes to creating such public pools. So anyway, I need to see what the interest might be in that. We have a survey that we're working on that Andra is developing to try to get some idea of what the scale of employees is and the interest. And the other part of that is we're dealing with 2 different states. So that also adds to the complexity of that. So Jackie?
Yeah, so I think the thing that, perhaps in our next meeting, we can be prepared if it's of desire to be a little more concrete and show you a list, and rather than just kind of riffing here like we're doing, but we can show you everything that's there. But what Celissa was talking about was the national work. She mentioned local, but the local is like a property management company in Exeter that actually serves up in Twin Mountain, Massachusetts, not in Vermont, but again, what could we do to either extend that out either through him or through his partnerships with others, because it doesn't, it takes somebody to convince another property manager why they're in this. They're not making a ton of money here, right? This economy of scale. So we have workers' comp, Sean, as part of that. We
Right.
had a group of directors sitting around a table interviewing a lot of different insurance companies, and we picked one. And so they have workers' comp and liability, but they've got auto insurance and homeowners insurance and renters insurance for the teachers. And not only the teachers, Sean, the families you serve. We're really trying to say, what can we do to help? So I think it'd be great to bring a few CELA folks here who've been using it. And I want to just add real quickly to what Celissa said about the, like, wait a minute, I should do the savings and help my program and my teachers. Why give it to the waste management? We had the same kind of thing happen with an insurance company. Well, I want to buy local, right? I know my insurance company on Main Street and I want to buy local. And finally they thought, well, I'm local. I'm local too. Why should the $2,000 of savings go to the insurance company on Main Street when my local company and my local staff and my local families could benefit? So it's just a different way of thinking. Yeah.
I just wanted to speak from a child care provider perspective. We haven't been able to utilize CELA due to the cost restraints that you have to put into your budget, and it's a lot. So I think because of that, a lot of programs have shied away from it. It's cumbersome to sort of learn and figure out and kind of manage through when you're in the classroom or constantly in a short staffing situation. So while I think that it is a great platform and something that we could build from and learn from, I think there's some drawbacks that we also need to think about and consider for a lot of programs who aren't able to foot that bill, and who may also just need somebody local who could say, hey, Jen, here's the insurance, packages, right? Instead of us finding the time to go and have to do that ourselves because we don't have it. So it's not going to happen. And I think that's one of the barriers we've been talking about in several of these meetings, is that we just don't have that time. Our directors, even as owners, we just don't have that time. So while these services may be started and whatnot, we need to do more about getting them into the hands of the provider so that we can adjust our budgets and give it to our staff and families.
And we agree completely, Jen. Everything you said was 100% correct. And so for years, that's why we had a few uptake who had that support, who had folks that are sitting around the table, they were helping each other. There was really good, but that is something that we are working on in terms of a grant we're writing to actually get that support and or partner with your local, childcare coordinators and everyone else to try to, how can you not have to be the one to try to navigate that? Right? If it is hard to use without good navigation. We completely agree with you, Jen. And that is something we're working on tackling. Like to tell you about it. Yeah.
So I suspect what we're going to find out when we do our surveys, obviously our childcare facilities are all small operations, small businesses, or even small nonprofits that don't have a whole lot of support staff to do the functions that I might have in my organization. So we've got to tailor that. The whole goal here is there are already some platforms that I'm aware of some of them out there, but we've got to refine those and try to find a way to make them better, especially in the Upper Valley. But of course, this could be replicated elsewhere. So there seems to be that gap, and Jen indicated that. So we've got to be able to close that gap. And that needs to be what our focus is going to be on item number C, as well as some of the items that are listed in there. So again, I want to go through these kind of quickly, and then we'll come back to decide who wants to be on what. And
I want to just interject one quick thing here. So I popped in the chat about the early childhood business collaboratives. That was a pilot like 3.5, 4 years ago in Vermont. And we now have 3 well-established and 3 more establishing. One of them is in Randolph. It will serve Orange County and the northernmost part of Windsor County. And those actually do all the things that Jen just said. And I will also say that we've adopted a very different model for the shared services platform in Vermont. And so it's free to all Vermont programs. Right now we have over 1,100 active users. I think we just called several hundred who maybe hadn't checked in within the past year. So people sort of come and go to it, but it has a lot of those back office support and it's incredibly user friendly.
I still think it's important to survey the providers to find out in the Upper Valley,
right,
what are their needs, what's top of mind,
Yeah.
if they had time, where would they put it? And are they already utilizing any of these things? And what is their impression of it, and what else they need?
So I have a draft I sent to Andrew with some questions, and they need to be ferreted out. They need to go out to the other two groups, and we only do one survey. I don't know where we're at with that. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Amy, the draft survey we were working on. So you may not have seen it yet. That's fine, because I know you're still working on it, but that'll be coming out very shortly. All right, so let's go to item number D. And that's the subcommittee creation of a consumers cooperative to purchase childcare services from providers. I don't know if this exists anywhere yet. Anywhere, I don't know. It's something that I thought of here that would at least make sense to me, right? Developing what that model would look like, developing the cost analysis, because it was brought up before that we're simply not paying enough to providers to make it work. So the vision that I had for that is that we'd be paying more. So we would pay more if we create this cooperative would pay providers more money than what the market rate is presently. We have to figure out what that number is. What is the appropriate number to adequately pay for that service? An employee would pay a certain percentage of that, whether it be, I've heard different numbers from 7% to 10% to 12%, and then the employer might pay the rest. Now there's pros and cons to that. My organization can probably afford to do that. I've got, I think, 7 parents right now that would need childcare out of 180 some odd employees. Dunkin' Donuts, that may not work for them. They may have all of their employees that have children, and they're operating on very, very thin margins, and they simply can't afford to do that. So there's an equity issue that comes into that as well. So there's a whole lot of pieces to this to see if something like this could work. It could work well if large employers are interested in it. And maybe that buoys the rest of the ones that can't provide that support. And of course, I realize Vermont provides a subsidy of some sort, which New Hampshire doesn't, at least not right now. That's a different issue to deal with there. Not sure if the feasibility of that in New Hampshire under the political circumstances that we're in. But nonetheless, we've got to, I think we need to try something. I want to do something for my employees to retain and keep my employees here at the city. And I need them to come to work. If they can't afford to come to work, I've got talented, qualified, and it's mostly women who cannot come back to work, and I need it back here. So the incremental cost for me to pay for that, I need to see what that incremental cost is, which is why we need an economist to go through those numbers and see what that looks like. So that's kind of the long and the short of item number D. I want some other thoughts on item number D. But we need some people to ferret this out with some technical assistance. We'll need a CPA to work on this because there may be a tax impact if an employee is providing a direct subsidy for a program to the provider. There may be a tax implication at the federal or even state level in Vermont. And again, I need an economist to actually run those numbers and help develop this model. So thoughts on that? Jackie? You're muted, Jackie.
Thank you. An email is going to go out either later today or tomorrow, and I'll make sure Sean and other leaders on, if I get the email, feel free to send it to your group. Taylor Caswell, the commissioner of our business and economic affairs department here in New Hampshire. He also runs what's called GOFER here in New Hampshire, Governor's Office for Economic Relief and Recovery. They're sitting on millions and millions of dollars, but they aren't going to release them unless it's sort of this one-time big impact. Recently, Sean, he said to a few of us, I would love to figure out a way for a group of businesses to help their employees across a group of childcare programs. And he actually charged us to go back, convene quickly, because this money isn't going to be there forever, right. A group to propose something to him, Sean. So we're going to do a fast track thing. The email was going out today or tomorrow. He might have a couple, $10 to $25 million to invest in a one-time build to increase that, but not just for there to be sort of, and that Dunkin' Donuts thing actually came up, but also how can that also mean more revenue to the childcare program so that they can then recruit and retain, right? If it's just offsetting the fee, it helps the businesses and the employees. It doesn't help getting more childcare and help the programs, right? So you will get that. And, you know, it's a fast track to try to maybe get some dollars that could end up helping the Upper Valley's plan.
Yeah, those are one-time monies that are good for either infrastructure, they're one-time hits, but we're obviously looking at the long game here. We've got to
Right.
change the whole dynamic of the system to make it work effectively. And the only way to do that is more money has to go into the system. It's as simple as that. I've got 66 miles of sewer main. I can't fix them unless someone gives me money to do it. So I got to spend the money. I got to find it somewhere to get it done. It's the same thing here. If we do not put more money into this, we don't pay people a decent salary, we're going to keep going down the hole we're going down. So we got to find a different way of doing it. And that's what I want to try it with this and see if we can make this work. This concept is, I'm sure, is going to be tricky. There's all kinds of pitfalls to it, but we've got to try something. And I think this is worth taking a closer look at. And businesses have to, and I consider myself a business from this perspective, even on the city, because we need to find a way we have to be part of this solution. We can't sit back and say, well, the federal government's going to solve it, because they're not. It's going to require us to do something. Any other thoughts on D before I move along? All right, let's go on to E.
Sean, I was just gonna say, I think there was a partnership between DHMC and Dartmouth College at one point, where they had a number of spots that they sort of reserved for their employees and paid for. So whether those spots were full or not. So I don't know, I might be able to check in with the director of the Dartmouth Child Care Center, because she would be familiar with it, or could get us connections to kind of just see how that model worked, if that's what we're interested in.
I think they're running their own facility though right now. Is that correct, Jen?
Well, they do have their own, but I mean, when I first started, and this was a while ago, and worked at DHMC Childcare, there were spots reserved in that center for Dartmouth College employees that Dartmouth College was paying for to hold those spots available. So I think that there's probably that model out there. I'm just not super familiar with how the logistics of it, how it works, you know, who collected tuition, you know, all of that, but.
That's correct, Jen, because we used to take the, I worked at Dartmouth College Child Care Center for 12, 14 years. And we used to take the overflow. We would sort of reserve slots for, you know, as first come, first serve from the college if you would DCC 4 and et cetera with the, or ditto with the hospital. But then we would also, if you had overflow, we would share our spaces. And I don't know how the billing works, but Sunny would definitely know.
See, I like a lot of employers in the Upper Valley. I have employees that live in Vermont. I got employees that live down in Claremont, Newport, all over the place. So it doesn't make sense for me to have a contract with one facility. It makes sense for me for those people to bring their kids to the community that they live in. So the model that I envision is that the expectation is you're going to provide a certain quality of service. And then I'm going to pay whatever facility you bring your child to. As long as they meet those requirements, we'll pay that. And I expect I'm going to pay more than what the market rate is now, because I expect that quality of service. So it's got to be more, but what that number is, I don't know. We got to figure that number out, right? And that's why the economist has to work with crunching those numbers. What does it cost to send a child to a child care facility to meet those certain standards that we think collectively is required, so that we're not behind other countries like Europe, and even Asian countries now are ahead of us because they're into early childhood education. So they're preparing their workforce of the future, and not just workforce, but also citizens of the future and basic life skills of the future, how to get along with other people, which is still a problem these days. In any event, that's what I see that group doing. And then there was the subcommittee creation of a cooperative child care entity. And, you know, I'm not overly excited about this particular concept, but that would be, we'd have a centralized child care facility here, and employers would provide funds for that one facility to make sure that's up and running. And then those employers would be guaranteed a certain number of slots in that created facility, that creative cooperative entity. Now that puts we already have people doing this work. We have nonprofits, we have for-profits, and that is only going to hurt them. Because we're going to be paying more money, obviously, for our employees in this cooperative setup than they're going to be, and we're going to take the more qualified people. So that, and as an employer, that means my employees, wherever they live, from all different points of the compass, have to bring their children here. Their spouse may be working in some other community, and that's just not as convenient, not as effective to do that. And I don't want to be the childcare business because it's not my business. Other people are already doing that. We should let them do that and help support that operation. But it is a concept, and that's item number E. Thoughts on that? There being none, we will move on to item number F. Subcommittee zoning regulations and other local regulatory code modifications. And this was brought up a couple of times about life safety codes, building codes, and zoning regulations. I'll just say at the outset, there's opportunities, I think, under the zoning regulations to create what they call bonuses, is different ways we do that. So there may be some ways to do that. Again, I'm not familiar with Vermont law, so I don't know how it works on that side. But I will tell you, when it comes to making modifications to life safety codes and building codes, I don't expect that is going to go very far at all for a whole variety of reasons. But nonetheless, it has been brought up by folks, and I'm certainly willing to have a subcommittee take a look at that and work with them in that regard. So thoughts on item F? Brenda?
So I sort of like cringe at the word, like, what risks we want to take and sort of like, lowering standards and all that. So because I am just so staunch on we should never, ever, ever lower our standards, but rather we just have to take the long view and seek sustainable solutions. And one of the things that I think, is perhaps helpful is thinking about the processes to meet codes and regulations, and perhaps we could institute more supportive processes. And so that people have, like the Child Development Division in Vermont has what they call licensing tech. And so the licensing tech is actually more of your friend than your licensor. I don't know if friend's the word, but because they really support you in going through the process. And so maybe we could expedite some processes. Maybe we could have some people in place who are supportive for the processes, but we should never, ever, ever even talk about lowering regulations or requirements. I mean, we can change them for the better always, but yeah, anyway. And the one thing that I can tell you that we learned very quickly when we implemented a grant program 5-6 years ago at Let's Go Kids is that we learned to know some people on a first name basis at the Agency of Natural Resources and in water and wastewater permitting. What we learned very quickly is that Vermont's laws are based on the federal guidance around water and wastewater. And so there is a process that takes a certain amount of time for, different parts of the process. And it's not like that can be hastened because it's based on the federal guidelines. And so those are things, like some things we're just going to bump up against. And then we have to figure out like how to support people who are going through that either wait period or, filling out the paperwork. So who can be there to provide technical assistance?
And you're right. That's particularly important because most of this is small businesses that don't have the familiarity, don't have the support. They need to be walked through the process. They need to be enabled and assisted in doing that.
One other key thing we learned is there are many landlords who will actually recruit early childhood businesses, and they'll say, I have this restaurant space that I'm looking to lease, and this would be a great space for this thing you want to do. And what they don't recognize is that there are laws of rules of occupancy around fire safety and around water usage are very different for sort of pass-through numbers. But when you're talking about water and wastewater, for example, in a space that might have been able to seat 90 people in a restaurant, it's a very different requirement if you're going to have even 30 people there every day for 10 hours a day. What looks good on the outside, we tell people, check with the Agency of Natural Resources before you invest a nickel. Like you have to know what you're going to be required, what your upfront expenses are going to be around things like that, because it can stop things cold.
And in our state, most of that's local. We obviously have licensing for childcare facilities. That's one thing. But when it comes to water and sewer, that's done at the local level. Other than septic, you get a state permit for that, for a septic tank. But municipal water and sewer is done at the municipal level. So you're right. That's I think a key factor is that, look, in my case, my code enforcement department, when you get an applicant from a child care facility, you have to assume these people don't know this process. You're going to have to take that extra time and sit down with them and walk through that. Oh, and to think about that and about this, and oh boy, water, that's done by DPW, but here's the issue with that. You're going to need this, this, and this, and I'm going to hook you up with this person, and they're going to call you and email you, and they're going to go over that entire process with you. Or if there's nothing you have to do with them, they will tell you that too. And oh, by the way, the fire code folks, here's the contact. I'm going to do an email introduction for them for you, so they can go over all of that stuff with you, so you can think about that and you know what you're up against at the beginning of the process. And this is a common refrain that we get. And you're right, with smaller businesses, we need to do that more, that hand holding through the process. That could definitely help out. But I think there's also some opportunities under zoning, at least in New Hampshire. Again, I don't know a lot in Vermont, but maybe some opportunities there for some exceptions in there to make things a little bit easier for zoning. I think that has to be done in each individual town and city. But if we can create some formatted, some templated zoning regulations that could be helpful, that could work. All right. Any other thoughts on F before we go to G? All right, G is public-private partner, use of public land and public facilities. I used the Allenstown Community Center example. I was the town administrator in Allenstown, and I created the child care facility. We built a facility at $3 million. We built a facility for them. We said, okay, Boys and Girls Club, you come in and run your programs. I will not charge you anything. I'll have my custodian. I'll pay the light bill, all of that. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is run your facilities. In Senior Center down below, you'll be able to operate your facilities, and we will charge you $1 per year. And you don't have to worry about any of those, keeping the lights on, fixing the leaky roof, whatever it might be, clearing the parking lots. All that will be done by us. And it continues today, and it's a really good partnership. I know the Boys and Girls Club, they also do childcare in the city of Concord. They have a childcare center there. I don't know if they moved their childcare center into Allenstown yet, but that's one example. We're using public property, public facilities. We do what we do best on the public side, operate facilities and hire staff and plow parking lots. Well, you do what you do best, and that is you run facilities in there, and I take all that overhead off of you, so you don't have to worry about it. So that's something to think about as well. The city has, property here as well. If we bring in a private entity in there, a private child care center, you can do the same thing. The only difference is that space is taxable. At least it is right now, unless we can do the tax exemption. But still, that's a minor cost compared to the cost of running a facility and worrying about, whether the heat's on and all of the stuff that goes along with that. So that's a possibility, a strong possibility that we could use here in the city. And again, the city does own land, and I know other towns around us own land as well. And those sorts of partnerships can be done. And we had a long-term lease agreement, well, they still do, with Boys and Girls Club and the Senior Center. So that's what the thought was on that. And there are different variations of that could work. So now that we have discussed all of those, I'm going to be adding one that Julie talked about. Who is interested in trying to be the lead to tackle some of these? And like I said, I'm guessing that I'm going to be involved in each of these to help work through them. Jackie.
So the question is, A, B, C, D, is that what you're talking about?
A through, B through G.
Right. So with obviously Upper Valley support and partnership, our organization, not necessarily me, not necessarily Celissa, but we would love to do something with C, maybe part of C. If you want us to lead it, we'll do that. But obviously I think it's best being an Upper Valley person, but we'd be glad to do something with that.
Okay, so you're looking at tackling C.
Yeah.
All right. Who else is interested in working with Jeff? We don't have a lot of our folks in our group are not here today, as I can see.
Right.
Unfortunately. But we'll just leave it there for right now. So Jackie's gonna.
Well, I could step up to help with that from a childcare perspective of the Upper Valley, if that makes sense. I mean,
thank you.
You can I'm not the best with the governance and all that kind of stuff, but you can kind of stick me wherever, and I'll help however, wherever I can.
Okay, so there's C. Let's talk about D. It would be good if we had someone from the private sector that was, we do have, I got somebody coming in from BioXL. We were able to recruit somebody from over there that'll be coming on board. So really we need some business people on this one who can look at this and have an interest.
So I can't step up into leadership. I just don't have the capacity for that, but I can connect whoever holds that to people who are already doing this in Vermont, like Casella Waste and other people who are doing it already.
So right now it's me until somebody else steps up to do that. So I've got item number D. How about E? Do we even want to spend time on E? Doesn't sound like.
Yeah, I was just going to say our lesson learned, and we've started doing and again, Vermont may have a whole different way that works great, and I'd love to hear about it. So, but in New Hampshire, with the SELA work that we started with this group of directors back in, 15 so years ago, it's only now that they're starting to think of sharing a back office. It's not like, oh yeah, I'll share a back office. Great. There's a lot of trust. It does take time, but if you don't start, you'll never get there. So it is worthwhile.
Yeah, that's under item C, but you're right. CCA Global Partners has done this, and they do this with businesses, and it's quite effective.
Right.
So that's actually, I was actually going to ask if it would be possible to sort of merge, was it C? Yeah, merge E with C. That would be my proposal, because I feel like they are hand in glove.
Well, I see them actually differently. We're talking about creating an entity that's going to build a facility of bricks and mortar, and they're going to run it with a governance body. That's E. Where C is totally different. That's taking all the existing entities, nonprofit and for-profit, and then having support elements that support those entities, and they keep functioning.
So I retract. I did not realize you were talking bricks and mortar.
Yeah. So E would be that, we would create this governing body that would go out and finance and operate its own childcare facility for its members. And I'm skeptical about that whole concept. That's quite the operation, and we already have people in this business and we've got to move somewhat quickly to have some impact here. That would take years to develop that and make that work.
But Sean, that interim step of sharing people versus merging versus,
Sure.
That idea like payroll, some of, four are now independent, but sharing payroll services, enrolling, just smart ways of doing things, but it takes time, but it's worth looking at.
That's why I think C, I think that falls under C,
Okay.
financial services provider.
Okay.
And, that's, I think, purchasing electricity and fuel oil together, and the financial services provider, or even IT provision, that sort of thing, and sharing that service, which is exactly what CCA Global Partners does. You have these small businesses and entities, and their support elements they share as a cooperative.
That's right. And they share staff too sometimes.
Right.
Well, considering that there's not enough staff to go around now for our programs of the Upper Valley, I don't think spending time establishing something new is going to be the best use of our time. So I think we stick to what we can do to help those that are already struggling in here.
Right. So there's the short-term issue, because we are in a crisis. There's no question about that. And there's the long-term goals that we might be able to accomplish.
So I have another thought. I realized maybe it's already here somewhere, but I realized when you were asking like what's missing, financial and business literacy. Like we work with First Children's Finance a lot to bring sort of financial literacy to the programs that we support around the state. And we sort of realized quickly when we were even way back in the days of mentoring, like, oh my gosh, some people don't understand that they're running a business, or some people who know they're running a business it's not strength. Like they got into it because they know about human development and, service industries and whatnot. But they don't understand the business aspect. So we're trying to figure out who's going to be the holder of it, who can, like, we'd love to bring First Children's Finance offices to Vermont. That would be a beautiful end goal, right? But we don't know if that's going to happen. And so we're trying to figure out who holds the piece, who can be here, and people just know this is who I call, this is where I turn, this is where I sign up for my financial literacy course.
Okay. So I can add that one, and that one might be a relatively quick win to be able to get something like that up and running.
And Sean, this is Julie. I can add to that. The Community Loan Fund has developed a business of childcare initiative. It's not probably as comprehensive as what Brenda is talking about through First Children's Finance, but they're also a CDFI, a community development financial institution, as we are. So we've done some work trying to zero in on supporting programs around business skill development. And again, we're happy to share that model and experiences.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. We also have our community college system too that might be able to help out with that. We have Allison Chisholm, who's on our steering committee.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'll just say one other thing that's sort of our mantra in New Hampshire. It was always our mantra, but now after the pandemic, during the pandemic, it's completely our mantra. We also, that other committee of recruiting and retaining, especially retaining, teaching people who leave in a year and giving all that financial literacy, really making sure that people that we give all these trainings to and help to are still around a year from now. That's been a real issue.
Got to pay people. It's as simple as that. I mean, in order for me to keep people on staff, I got to pay them money, and I got to keep up with that marketplace. And if you don't do that, all the money you invest in training is not going to go anywhere. It's just, that is the tantamount problem we have to deal with. We have to change the dynamic of the marketplace, and the marketplace has to pay people more money, and that's the big issue at the end of the day. All right. So, do we have any disagreement that we eliminate E altogether? Could we not spend any time on that with the limited resources we have? I don't see any objections. So E is now off the table unless somebody forces me to put it back on. All right. The zoning one in life safety codes, anybody who's interested in being on that or leading that up? Okay, that falls under me then. Item F.
I'm not comfortable leading that, but I'm happy to step in as someone who's gone through the process and provide documents from licensing and kind of share some struggles. I mean, I've been through the process where I've built from the ground up a whole new facility and been through that from step one to finish. And then also just taking over a different facility and going through something that's already been established. So I can maybe provide input.
I think I can be the most helpful with this one because I know how this operates, obviously, because this is what we do. So I can work with my planning department and my code enforcement people for two different courses of action. Course of action number one, to see what we can do about the zoning piece, because I think there's some opportunities there, and create a template that other towns and cities can use, at least in New Hampshire, and maybe it's of some value to folks from Vermont. Again, I don't know what your statutory scheme is there. There's that part, and also basically being the welcome wagon, right? Being when somebody comes in with these applications, how we route that and how we process that. That's a different mechanism. That's more of a programming type of thing. And I can talk to my staff on that. And then if we can figure that out here, then we can go to some other towns and say, look, this is what we do. And you might be interested in doing this. It can help out your childcare facilities immensely if you do that. Walk them through that process.
John, you might not be seeing the chat since you're monitoring, but I think Amy Brooks just volunteered to help with that.
Amy Brooks has helped me with everything. I don't know. I need like 5 Amy Brookses. I don't have enough of them. That's the problem.
Go Amy. I have a question. So it sounds like you just completely took the public-private partnerships off the table, and there are a ton of those happening in myriad ways in Vermont. And so I'm just wondering, would it be helpful to like hear what people are doing and how towns are like leasing town buildings at a reduced rate to program? Like what would it be helpful or not? Because
we're not taking G off the table, just E.
Okay.
So can I ask a request? So I'm taking minutes in the agenda and I've lost track of what letters everybody's referring to. So if you can use the title of the work plan, or at least just use the word zoning or tax exemption or whatever, because I'm trying to keep track of who's helping with what. And I'll go over it before we leave at 2:30, but.
Yeah,
so public-private partnerships is what I was referring to. And maybe I misheard you, Sean. Because it is kind of fast and furious and you guys are all awesome. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to make sure and tell you about stuff if it's going to be helpful to the conversation. And I also am trying to like take in what you're saying. So I just want to make sure that I think public-private partnership is an important conversation. And I thought I heard you say that we're not going to talk about it anymore.
No, I'm talking about E. That was the creation of a childcare cooperative that has bricks and mortar. So E, I don't think we need to talk about, but G, we definitely need to talk about. There's a lot of opportunities, and those are relatively easy. For instance, if I got a piece of land, that can go anywhere from saying, I will give you this piece of land if you build a childcare center and you charge these rates, whatever it is. Like, that's one thing I could do, right? Two, I can say, look, I'll invest in the money and I will use my bonding rates, which is like 1.78% interest for 20 years, compared to your 6 or 7% that you might pay, with a certain structure, so on and so forth. So there's a whole range of opportunities that can occur to do this. And I gave that one example that I used in Allenstown, but there are others across the country, and there's different ways to do that, different ways to structure that. I'm just going to see what sort of interest there is. And again, I'm not the only city that has municipal land. There are others as well that have that.
And I throw in an example that I'm aware of that might be another way to think of it too, that might help people say, oh yeah, I actually could connect to that. So I'm one of the other things that I'm doing in a different project is working with the Bridgewater Community Center. So Bridgewater schools merged. There was this beautiful building that was just empty. The school building that had been there for forever and a day, older than dirt, very beloved by the community, but was just going to be razed. And a group of citizens got together, Bridgewater residents, and said, we want to save this building. We want to be able to use it. It's a vibrant part of our community. So, and this is, it's like the dance of private funding, right? Is happening. However, there's this beautiful owned building. So they got grants to fix it up, to get it up to code. There's going to be a licensed childcare facility there, an infant toddler place. And also, senior activities. There's going to be after school care, preschool, all kinds of, there's, private businesses that are renting space there, like a hairstylist. So it's going to be an actual like vibrant community center is the idea there. But this is another way, I think, where there's public-private partnerships that can happen. There's all kinds of beautiful old buildings across the area that could use this kind of TLC and benefit the communities.
I'm sorry, Andra, I didn't catch where that was.
That's in Bridgewater, Vermont.
Okay. And I just, to Jen's point earlier, when things like this are built, making sure to involve the existing infrastructure. Where do they need support? They may have openings. They may have a classroom closed they could open if they had staff. Just really making sure not just building something that then actually hurts and competes when they could open up many spaces if they had staff.
For instance, in the Allenstown case, I was able to get a community development block grant and 2 different rounds of tax credits to be able to pay for that. There was no property tax dollars for that $3.1 million facility, none. It was all paid for by grants, donations, and tax credits and those sorts of things. So it takes a partnership, right? The nonprofits, along with the municipality and others, the state agencies, to make it work. But it can be done if everybody starts to work together to get it done. So it's another possible solution that we can put into place to do that. The other possibility too is I used the example of the community in Nebraska there, and I showed the video of that, where they created the child care center, the municipality, the school district pays for it. That's another option as well to think about, especially when you're dealing with pre-K, 3 and 4. So there's a whole range of options that are possible here. That group, whoever's interested in that, can be rather busy looking at all those different types of things. But I'm interested in doing something up here. I did it there. It took several years to get it done, but we got it done. And it's going to take some perseverance to get there. So
I think too, Sean, I've seen some creative models with affordable housing developers
yes.
incorporating childcare in both small and large ways. So I think there could be unique opportunities there as well.
Yeah, I just built an industrial park up at the airport. I've got, we have 5 lots. We just leased out one of them, but that's one I could easily turn around and say, okay, well, I'm gonna let somebody have this. I'm gonna turn it into a nonprofit or a for-profit child care facility. They'll have to pay the tax for their portion of the space that they're using. But I could do that. I mean, I had that space right now. I just extended water and sewer, and they're putting the power lines up in that neighborhood right now. So there are opportunities to make this happen, and we have tax deed land that we take, and then when you build into the zoning and say we're going to allow childcare for centers any place in the city, that's one way you could change that zoning dynamic to allow that to occur anywhere, because they're not exactly a huge threat to the safety of the neighborhood. So anyway, anybody who's interested in leading up item number G? Because if not, I will. Okay. And the financial literacy one, because that's, we've added two, financial literacy. I would want to talk to Allison Chisholm about that a little bit as well, but it sounds like Julie's got some experience already with that. To be able to flesh that out some more.
Mhm.
So I'll develop a work plan for that one. And then again, the facilities in terms of adequacy and cost and leasing components and quality of programming, quality programming space. I could build that out as well.
So we talked about the financial piece a little bit at the steering committee on Friday. And I think what we would want to be mindful about is the time commitment. Yes, this is definitely an area where I'll speak for myself, but you know, as coming from being a teacher in the classroom to kind of moving up the chain, that there's not a lot of background in education when it comes to those pieces. So the time commitment and what we're talking about and how we would provide this service, we'd have to be thoughtful about that, because I don't think there's going to be that time right now for people to kind of take a class, or, you know, we just have to be kind of thoughtful of how we would present that. But I definitely think it's an area to improve, because obviously that's the sustainability of moving forward, is understanding the business perspective. So there's a lot to learn. It's just the thought process behind it, I think.
And wouldn't it be cool, Jen, if you had a place where you could just pick up the phone and say, I need to think out loud with you for 10 minutes. Like that's what I envision. Like this, yes, you could take the education when you do have the time, when you have the time, but and that people coming in would have it as part of their prep, but also that people would have like a resource to just call.
And that's exactly what I would need right now. I have these ARPA funds that we've been granted, but I want to be thoughtful. And what do I do now that I can sustain long term? I don't want to give a raise to my staff for the next 2 years and then say, oh, sorry, I have to take that back because now I have to charge those families. So somebody who could really kind of brainstorm out with me, okay, I have these funds. What is it going to cost me to offer an individual health savings plan? What's it going to cost me if I were to give, you know, $1 raise, or, you know, what is, so that's the piece that's like, okay, I know what I want to do, but who's there to help build that for me, and who do I call for that?
And that's the point. Our childcare facilities are in a state of crisis right now. They're shorthanded on staff. They may have people out on COVID protocol. To go and all of a sudden shift in a direction within the next 30 days to say, we're going to provide this education program. That's great, but do you have 8 hours or 4 hours that you can take out of your day? You're busy enough to even attend these meetings that we have going on right now. And Jen's in 2 of those with me. We've got to mind that, you know, our boots on the ground are in the middle of a fight right now, trying to survive. And we're trying to look at the long term. So we got to do 2 things: the short term relief and the long term relief. And we can't ignore one or the other, because if we only deal with the short term, we'll never change the dynamic of the system that we're in right now. Okay. Other thoughts on the items under number 1 on the agenda? Am I missing anything? Again, you folks, some of you are in this field, and I need some just input as to whether or not you think we're on track, we're missing something. And again, we've got a couple of changes I'm going to be making, but anything else?
Can I just ask at this point to double check that I have the right people under the right work plan category subcommittees?
So we've got Jackie is going to take item C, which is the subcommittee creation of a service support cooperative for childcare entities. So I'll be working with her on that.
Yep.
And it looks like I've got the rest for now anyway. And I've got to develop 2 more. The facilities are related in terms of adequacy, the cost of operating those facilities, and the quality of the space. That's another work plan. And then the financial literacy piece, developing a work plan with that. I'm going to work with Allison Chisholm on that. Anybody else who's interested in building that out. So those are the 2 new ones, those last 2.
Right. So my understanding was that I didn't have any. So Sean, you're going to work on the property tax exemption as well?
Yeah, I'm going to take care of that one.
Okay. And no one is helping you with that. What about sort of the gathering?
It won't be that heavy of a lift. I'm going to use attorneys to draft up the language on it. So you know.
And then was there another work group added to look at what's already existing, or we just want to incorporate that into future communications, make sure we're folding that in as we go?
Well, hopefully with the subcommittee, we're gonna, yeah, I mean, the groups that are working on the different items will try to determine what's going on already. So I'm gonna need some help with that from folks, especially on the Vermont side, because I have very little experience on the Vermont side with the things I've been tasked, which are most of the other items in there. I'm gonna need a little help with that. Like I said, I'm not familiar with the structure of all the state of Vermont. I'm from New Hampshire, so Southern New Hampshire too, which is different than this area.
Okay, thanks.
And the other thing Amy brought up at our last steering committee meeting, and I still haven't had a chance to even look at the material she provided me, is we have and Amy can certainly jump in. She can explain this better than I can, and certainly Jen could. Right now, the childcare facilities are receiving some subsidies from the state. However, they're not taking full advantage of that because of the present structure of that. And we need to do what we can to help. So the thought was that I would probably hire somebody to help work with these childcare centers to be able to complete the appropriate amount of paperwork and also the legal end of that, and using one of our attorneys to do that, and try to figure out how these childcare centers can take full advantage of that program and then provide a discount in the backside. So Amy, did I get it correct?
So Julie, we worked on this before. It's the issue with not being able to maximize the subsidy rate because we cannot charge everybody that baseline amount. So for example, infants at a center, full-time rates, $275. We can't charge parents $275 because private pay in Coos County or, you know, Thornton or Croydon or whatever, they can't afford it. So you make it $245 and you're leaving money on the table.
Mm-hmm.
What I was trying to find out, is there a way to structure a sliding fee scale or some sort of can we privately pay for someone to go center to center to help them structure their scale, their fee scale, so that they can maximize the subsidy? And we've talked about this over COAS, because our private pay, our parents make $9 an hour. They're not gonna
Right.
our average parents. So you can't charge them the market rate, even the market rate, which isn't even paying our staff. But so we wanted to see, we figured, I thought that was low hanging fruit.
I think it could be. I think you want to have, there may be two elements to that strategy. One is ensuring that providers are structuring their fees the best way they can to maximize revenue. And then are there policy level changes relative to the child care subsidy program that we might want to look at?
But the thing is, can they provide the full rate and then provide a discount in the backside to that parent?
Can they, Julie? That's a federal government thing. Do you know, Julie?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You should ask.
So is that
Yeah.
the same as oh, sorry.
No, that's a,
Is that the same as offering scholarships? Because I know there are some programs in Vermont that what they do is they charge the full tuition and then they figure out how to offer scholarships where they on the backside are taking, like, so they're bringing it down to that $245. And so I never operated a program where I was responsible for figuring out how the scholarships work. So I can't speak knowledgeably to that. I just know that there are a number of programs in Vermont who do that, in part because they want to show what it actually costs, right?
Mhm.
And they want families and community members to understand it actually costs $275 or whatever the number is. And so even if I'm only charging $175, or even if you're only paying $175, it actually costs this amount.
I would love to see how those programs are doing it in Vermont.
right.
So
And
I can find that
they're in
out. I'll ask around.
compliance. Great. I would love to see that.
Yeah, if you can give us a connection, that will be helpful. Because I'm not sure that we're going to tackle this. Our group here, we need to hire someone to go and ferret this thing out and help, and then turn around and go back to childcare facilities and say, okay, this is a model by which you can do that. A legal model by which you can do that, of course, and somewhat quickly, because time is of the essence here to do that. So the way I left it with Amy, she provided the material. I'm going to see if my person who does projects for me can tackle this, and then also the attorney that we use, and then get them in a meeting with Amy and work through this thing and see if we can hash it out. That's the strategy on that one. All right, anything else? Because we have just item number 2 in terms of, we have a meeting coming up on February 22nd. And the question is trying to be able to have a sustained meeting time because we're losing people. People are coming and going, which is going to happen. But can we come up with a sustainable date that is consistent on the calendar that we can operate with? Does Mondays work? Is Monday at 1 o'clock, or the other one I think is 8 o'clock in the morning? I think is the next one on, what is it, 22nd there? Let's see.
And I have a quick question, Sean, when you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, obviously, like Amy put in the chat, is someone from the Upper Valley. I think Jen might have agreed to try to help as best she could. And Amy mentioned her and Andra, anybody's welcome. But then what's the process? Are we to go and do some tasks in between committee meetings? What's the process you're thinking?
So right now, for you and I will work on the item that you would have. We'll work through it. I think I have to have my hands on all of these because at least to get people going, and then making sure we get the reports back. And then we can talk about this as a group once we've come and dealt with the issues that are in the work plan, try to build those things out. And then we have a larger steering committee that we report to that every.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, that I report. And that way we make sure the advocacy and the retention and recruitment committee are on the same. We're not going off in desperate directions.
Great.
That's the goal.
Jen or I should be in with you too, just because we're kind of in touch of what the capacity is of directors right now and what their actions are, just to make sure that you're not doing too much work that. And then if you want, Jen or I can take a look at the survey, because if you're going to send out a survey, we should make sure we put some asks in there about what types of things they're looking for, because to be honest with you, they have no time. Like there's like 4 or 5
Absolutely.
that are
Absolutely.
everything's one. Everybody else is on the verge of collapse. So
You're absolutely right, Amy. And one of the things that I actually wonder, one of my concerns about asking what they want is that sometimes when people are operating in crisis,
I agree.
you can't even think beyond, the end of your arm. And so I wonder if there's like some way that you can also offer like a menu of options. In addition to what do you want, but like also offer a menu, because some people will be like, oh my gosh, I can't even think what it is I need. Like
And we don't need you to do it. You don't need to do anything new.
So here was my plan with the survey. First of all, I'm wondering out loud, and that we can go back with the steering committee on this, but I'm wondering if we want to offer some kind of like financial incentive or something to the providers who fill out this survey, so that they feel like an immediate gratification, immediate concrete feedback. We have funds in this initiative to compensate ECE providers for their participation. So I'm wondering out loud whether that's possible. The other thing is, I was going to put together a Google form that was like, check, 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 check. Super easy, super quick. Jen has looked at the survey and made some comments on it. So I was going to look at those in more detail and run it by Amy just to see what she thinks as well. And then we're going to discuss how to make sure we get the right group of people that we're reaching out to with this survey. So it's not limited, but also it's not so big that we're reaching outside of the scope we want to. So that was the intent for it. So if anybody has feedback about it or ideas, like let us know. But I've been in the classroom, so I know how it is.
You need to have some data from the Upper Valley, the Vermont and the New Hampshire side of the Upper Valley. There's data, of course, a lot of data points out there, but we need some data that's specific to us to make sure that we're focusing in the right areas and we understand the problem as it is.
And Andra, could there be something in there? Would you be interested if you didn't have to do anything new? Or something in there with some good of supportive wording? We're not asking you to do new things, right? That would you be interested if this was somehow arranged for you on your behalf? So I don't know what the best wording would be. Brenda, I don't know how they do it in Vermont to help people do things, because that's the mistake we've made in New Hampshire. We've just sort of, here it is and do it, and they keep it time.
So we have this mantra, nothing about us without us.
Right.
And so that, I know that's common in other conversations. But in early childhood, we're just like, you know what? We need to hear your story. How are you impacted by this, that, and the other thing? Like, tell me your story. How's it going? What are your challenges today? What were your challenges last week? Like, we need to hear your story. And that's what we keep taking to the State House. Like, I mean, and promoting on all of our social, like, it's sort of like, these are real people and this is real stuff they're dealing with, and you need to know about it.
Yeah, and honestly, the way I was looking at the survey was more like, you already have these problems and you're solving them one way or the other, either by avoiding it or solving it in some way that's too expensive for you, or, you know, I mean, really, like, this is happening, right? So, you know, what are you looking for? What, you know, how do you
What
solve
would
the
be
problems
most
now, and
helpful?
how would you want them
Yeah.
to be solved? Yeah.
I think it needs to be written, pardon me, I think it needs to be written, maybe Jen can look at it too, like in the most supportive way. Like, we know you can't add one more thing to the plate. That's not the point of these questions. The point of these questions, could things be taken off your plate? Could things be helpful to you? You see what I mean? Something like that.
All right, so back to 2A in terms of the February 22nd meeting. Like I said, we've got that one in the morning. Does this time work better for people if we did Mondays at 1 o'clock? Granted, we don't have not even half of the people that are normally on this, that at least signed up for this committee. Does that work for folks? If it doesn't, give me the thumbs down right now. If it works, then thumbs up will be good.
Did we ever do a doodle poll for this group specifically on times, like how, or was it just we chose our availability and that's how we came up with the Monday and Thursday times?
That, what you just said.
And it might almost be worth it to do a quick doodle poll to the people who signed up for this, just to get a sense, and we could put some different dates and times or whatever. But I would love to see more people be a part of it, and I would hate to limit us to the Monday at 1 o'clock if we're not going to get a variety, or if it's going to prohibit people from attending.
Well, honestly, so the way that it worked was, you know, like, the two of you have to be here, I have to be here. So I took our 3 availabilities, and that's the window in which we have. That's what I've made. That's how I populated the doodle poll.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Got it.
yeah.
And some people are going to drop out. Some people, you know, they sign, they just want to see what it's about and all that, and try to get an idea of what it is. But like everything else, it comes down to a small core of people to make things actually happen at the end of the day.
The other thing is that the other thing is that as we get going, and once we have platforms for communication and document repositories, there can be asynchronous work that happens, and people that can't come to the meetings will be doing that stuff. So. Right,
that's the idea of the subcommittees, because you might have 1 or 2 people that are working on that. It's a lot easier for 2 people to get together, and it's convenient than to try to get, we have 13, 15 people on this committee. Try to get all those stars to align is basically impossible with everything that we have going on. So,
yeah, so the question with subsequent meetings and having any kind of schedule is whether we all just want to continue with this, like the eclipse window that we can fit, or do we want to choose a regular meeting time that fits those windows?
and really what my vision is, that people will work on the subcommittees and go and do the work, and then come back and say, here's the results of that, and then talk it through. Because, you know, we're at the point, we've already talked about the 60,000 below. It's now time to roll up the sleeves and go and ferret these out. Again, I got to create the other 2 work plans, but other than that, it's time to start moving forward on that and cooperate with that. And if we have that shared workspace, it's easy to do that. You can participate when you can participate and see what's in there, and then provide feedback. And with Teams, we have a chat function in there, and it records all of the chat, you know, asking questions, providing feedback, because I can't follow all the links that are coming on the screen so quickly here because I'm old. But other than that, young people can do that. In any event, so we'll talk more about this at the February 22nd meeting, but we'll strive for the 2 days a month right now. But again, I think I'd rather have people working in subcommittees and then report back when they're going to be ready to do so. I think that might be the better way to go. And then maybe have a meeting once a month when the whole group gets together, which may be more feasible with 13 to 15 people. But we can finalize that on the 22nd. Any other questions? So Jackie, I got to reach out to you, and we'll set up a time to meet. And then Brenda's going to send me some material. And then we're going to meet with Amy and Jen, if she's available, to work through that item she has under C, which is the creation of a service support cooperative. All right, anything else, folks, before we adjourn? Because it's 2:26 and I always end on time. Julie.
I had two quick follow-up points. I wanted to bridge back to Brenda's original point, and I'm wondering if there's some kind of a template. I think we've all worked with templates through strategic planning processes to help us maybe identify existing resources in Vermont and New Hampshire. So maybe we could think about a template that might be useful for that purpose, to catalog what already exists, because I think that's a really important point. And then second follow-up is we just generated more work for you in particular and for the group. So with those two new work plans, is there any way to blend them into any of the existing categories? Or do you feel they're separate and distinct enough that we need two new work plans? For
So
those
the way this is going to work is I'm going to have to prioritize, because I only have so many. I mean, I have my day job.
Mhm.
So I'm going to have to prioritize those and also
Okay.
look at the schedule in terms of when those, I can't submit a bill, at least in the New Hampshire legislature, until this fall. And I already know what that looks like. So that probably won't take me a whole lot of time for that tax exemption to get that piece done. I got to build the alliance to get it there, but the advocacy hopefully will help me with that. But what it's going to come down to is I can't do all of these things by
Right.
myself. So what I'll do is I'll prioritize those, and I'll have all those in some degree of motion moving forward. And depending on how much help I get from others and providing me information, I'll try to build them out. That's about all we can really do at this point.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
There's only so many Amy Brookses, and she's already leading another committee, and Jen's running an operation right now. So that's incredible, you know, in a field that's in a crisis. So we'll just do the best we can. We have to be realistic. A lot of these things take a long time, and nobody wants to hear that. And some of you know how this works. It's anything that the legislature takes forever, and usually almost never gets through the first time. You're going to fight it for a couple of years sometimes to get it through. But it's a fight we have to take on, and things we have to do. So I'm committed to it, and obviously you folks are. That's why you're here. So we'll give it our best shot. Any other thoughts? All right. Thank you for your time. It's 2:29, and we will end the meeting.
Thank you.